Hello, hello. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to EduTALK. EduTALK is a weekly virtual talk show created out of the need for a global learning community. And we focus on topics that directly impact our people, the African diaspora. There are several people who come on our program to share, to talk about educational aspects and things that are relating to education and how we uplift our people. We have with us this evening uh, Professor Rosalea Hamilton, and she's no stranger. She's no stranger to EduTalk. Dr. Barker is here with me as usual. Um, Professor Hamilton, welcome to EduTalk. I'm just saying welcome for formalities, but you're no stranger to EduTalk at all.
I'm home.
Yes, yes. Barker, you want to say something before we get into it? Because we have a few things to discuss this evening as it relates to Constitution and the Jamaican people.
No, I mean, it's always a pleasure. Just first of all, just engaging with Professor Hamilton on the work that she's doing with her team to shine a light on this very, very important process. And it's work from people like Professor Hamilton, which will have the greatest impact, because one of the biggest risks we can take as a society is to allow politicians to shape this. And it is asking the thief to design your house. Pardon the use of the word thief, but in any essence, the point I'm making is that they will create the loopholes so that they can benefit from the process at all times, because there's a vested interest. And therefore, it is very important that the process is never driven from a political side. It has to be driven by people. And I'm seeing, when I read through the document, that this is really where the departure is in the process. But we can delve into that a little bit more. But my sense was that there was this, the way it is being set up at the moment, the way it is being, the framework of it, almost establishes an executive hegemony rather than a the electorate or the populace having the people, for want of a more simple term, having that hegemony. And I think that's, for me, is where that's where I feel like the advocacy network is asking some serious questions. Have I gone anywhere close to where you are?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We framed it as executive sovereignty. And, I've used the term in explaining how we've got to where we are now. Back in the day, during the colonial process, during the process of the institution of slavery, you had real monarchical sovereignty. The king and the queen ruled, but at independence since 1962, the power shifted to the executive, the cabinet, and it was written right there in section 69, subsection 2 of the Constitution, clearly stating that the control of government is in the hands of the cabinet, led by the prime minister. And the idea that their decisions must be accountable by the people's representative in parliament, that they ultimately must be accountable to us through our representatives and directly to us as we hold them accountable. That point has been missing. And I think as we talk about the move to the republic, as we talk about moving to a state where the people are sovereign, that's where we now begin this discussion about the role of the citizen in a democracy and the role that each and every one of us as Jamaicans must play in ensuring that we create a constitution that represents our will, and that ultimately it anchors, provides the supreme law for the republic that we want to build.
Yeah. And for those of us, thank you, Professor Hamilton, opening up the floodgates already. For those who are just joining us, we have Professor Rosalea Hamilton here, and she is the founding director of Institute of Law and Economics And you hear the word advocate coming up, and advocacy coming up a lot, because she's the co-chair of the Advocates Network in Jamaica. And they have membership right across the globe, right, Professor?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Diaspora is a big part of our grouping.
What
Yeah.
engagement.
Yeah, before we go into that, we want to talk about what the Advocates Network is doing. Share a little bit about what's happening there, and then I'll pass over to Dr. Barker.
Well, as you may know, we made a submission to the Constitutional Reform Committee on July 14th. And, it's on YouTube, where what we did was to lay out our initial thinking about the way to frame the constitutional changes. And we located it in the context of the current flaws in our democracy, in our parliamentary arrangement, and what we see as necessary changes to fix it, to improve it. So that's something that we did on July 14th. And then right after that, we launched a secondary school competition. And this competition, we actually call it a Philly Republic Secondary School Debate Competition.
Yeah.
Right. And we're actually now in the quarterfinals of the competition. And so I don't know if you or any of your listeners are alumni for Wolmer's Boys School, Ocherius High, Campion, Jamaica College, Montego Bay High for girls, Knox College, Mount Alvernia, Conward College, Mayday High School, and Queens High School. These are the schools in the quarterfinal.
That's good. It's very diverse. It's diverse schools.
Yes, all over. It's a national competition, and schools from all over the country participated.
Yeah. Do you have a flyer we can share?
Sure, I will send that to you.
We'll send it
and
out.
absolutely, because the debates are actually live on YouTube.
Yeah.
Okay, that's something we could share as well.
Yeah.
Tell me something. So if, as the Advocates Network, right?
Yeah.
Is organizing this competition. What are the topics, for example, what are the topics that students are debating amongst themselves? Is it just on the narrow constitutional issue, or is it, maybe some supplemental issues that are being discussed?
Yeah, they're related issues. They're all linked. In fact, I can just tell you what the quarterfinal topics are. The first one speaks to diverting public funding from tertiary education to improving infrastructure, transportation, drainage, etc., highlighting the fact that, these budgetary choices are difficult. But education is key, as you know, that's your focus. And therefore, should we be focusing on tertiary education, improving the educational outcomes of our people versus, so that's one debate. Then the idea that public voting to determine the distribution of government's capital expenditure. This takes us into this whole discussion about participatory budgeting. And that's something that we have put to the Constitutional Reform Committee as something that we see ought to be in the Constitution as a way to get Jamaicans to directly participate in making choices about how their own taxpayers' dollars is being spent, And so that's part of the discussion there. Then there's also the idea of putting greater weight to votes of young people during the referendum. So that's a very interesting conversation. The idea is that in a referendum for constitutional reform, it is the youth that will benefit most from these changes. And
or bear the burden.
Or they bear the burden, absolutely. So this idea of a greater weight of their vote, maybe their vote is 1.5, maybe in terms of weight, is an interesting one. And then the last idea is the idea of the deprivation of rights on the states of emergency as a way to tackle the the kind of epidemic crime that we see here in Jamaica. So the idea that you may have to give up some rights. So these are issues, and they all touch and concern the Constitution. The last one especially is about rights and freedoms. And in our chapter 3 of our Constitution, that's where we deal with these rights.
Okay.
You've
I mean, I was gonna delve into something here with Professor Hamilton. And I'm gonna wind it back a little bit in the conversation around the work that you are doing as a civic body, as against the work that is being done in the I'd say almost, I think I see an itinerary of consultations that led by, I think, Malahoo Foot, the Justice Minister, across the island. Are there, in terms of the work you are doing, is there any point where the work that civic bodies intersect with the work of what the government is doing in terms of bringing this matter to some level of not necessarily a consensus, but certainly a conversation where both, is there anywhere where that happens in the process?
Well, I can tell you it happened when we launched this debating competition, because the Constitution Reform Committee is very much aware of the power of debate and the important role that young people can play in articulating the issues and speaking to their peers. So we had 2 members of the Constitutional Reform Committee who attended the launch and provided the kind of support that in terms of, endorsement, so to speak, of it. So I think very much around the public engagement, there's clearly synergies. In fact, the Advocates Network in June last year started a public education online forums around the Constitution, because we know that this thing was coming. I mean, remember the Prime Minister made the announcement that he's moving on, and therefore we'd have to change the legal framework to move to a republic. That was said from March of last year. And so we have been disappointed that it is only now that we're seeing formal engagements with the public by the government through the Constitutional Reform Committee. But at that very first session when we launched in June, the minister herself was part of the forum, and the opposition spokesperson on justice, Donna Scott Montley, was also there. And so we have had these kinds of engagements with the public where we've come together and provide the kinds of information and insight that can only augur well for all of us as we engage the public and increase understanding and knowledge about the Constitution.
Yeah, that's, let me just dig a little.
Go on.
I'm just trying to get to, thanks for that, Professor Hamilton. I think my question though is more, I'm trying to get to the framework by which we get there, in the sense where civic bodies actually play a role that is integral to the final outcome. What I'm worried about is whether it's a parallel thing happening, and at some point we get to and saying, but this is what we had in mind, and the government said, but this is what we did, and here are some moments where we talk to you. What I'm looking for is much more of a framework that says, this is what the entire process looks like. The government will be doing this, civic will be doing this. At this point in the process, all of the think tanks, all of this will sit together, and maybe some independent body takes it forward into a point where we say, we have heard what everybody has said. I don't know if what I'm saying, if I'm saying it as clear as I want to say it, but I don't see enough that suggests to me that a document like the one you share will be seen in the way that would actually, I suppose I'm worried that a document like the one that you share can have all of the great ways of looking at this, the references, the different, but there's no real formal structure for it to be fully considered and either discarded or included. Am I
It's a
missing?
good question. No, it's a good question, good observation. That is something, if you notice at the end of our document, one of the things that we talked about was the terms of reference. And we argued that there is no requirement to make the work transparent. And so one of the issues we pose is, what is the mechanism that the
Okay.
CRC will use to determine the will of the people, to dissect, share, analyze, and come up with which of the many suggestions they're getting from the public will be defined as the will of the people. It's not an easy process, but there must be something, or else we will feel that we're speaking to the wind.
Okay. I think I understand my question then.
Right. And so let me say that, for example, in the case of Barbados, there is a formal submission process, there are deadlines. If you look at their website, you see, sections of the Constitution, and you can see online all the submissions that, for example, suggestions about a preamble, they're all there. Suggestions about the head of state, suggestions about the judiciary, etc. So there are many ways to organize this, and we are a bit disappointed that we're not seeing that level of organization. For example, we've asked for all the submissions to be made transparent.
Yep.
We've asked for the minutes of the meetings to be made transparent. Now, some of it is online, but not a lot, and so not all of it, certainly with respect to the minutes. And so we are not clear either. So don't feel alone, Dr. Markham. We're not clear how all of this information that is submitted to the Constitutional Reform Committee and what they hear when they go to these town hall meetings, how does that translate to provisions to change the Constitution?
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So let's tone back a little bit with the Constitution. We're going to come back to it with the content. How often, because Professor Hamilton, you mentioned about the communication between the government or the reform body, the group, and the populace. How often do they have these meetings? Because if what I'm thinking of, if you're in the process, and it should be very hot now in the process of turning out some documentation, and as you said, in the case of Barbados, they have certain structures up even on the website, and they're contributing and so on, and they're moving towards this this formation of the document. Is there something like this happening in Jamaica, where if you walk on the street or you go to a body in a community, they can say, yes, somebody just showed up last week and we're having another meeting, in the next 2 weeks and so on, because this is serious. Do you see anything like that happening on a regular basis?
No, not really. What we know is that the Constitutional Reform Committee goes to different parishes and engages the people. We've seen that. But what we don't see is a schedule. So if you ask me, what's the next meeting, where will that take place, what time, and so on, I can't say go to the website and you'll see a schedule, So that's a bit disappointing, because in fact, the 2 terms of reference of the Constitutional Reform Committee had indicated that there would be a work plan, and that was due from March the 29th, and we've not seen that work plan. And it would suggest to me that the work plan would have those kinds of details, that in the month of August, these are the parishes we'll go to, these are the places we're going to go to. So we don't see that. So it's a bit difficult to really follow the process. Now, we have taken the view that this idea of ownership of the Constitution and public engagement is not only the job of the government, it's the job of all of us, because we are shaping a constitution to represent our will. That's the view we take. And so you are actually doing your job and your role as a citizen in our democracy, as a Jamaican, to engage these kinds of conversation. so that other Jamaicans can understand and learn and gather the information required to inform the process. So we have decided, the Advocates Network, that we will put a program together, engage young people through the debates competition, go organize town hall meetings. That's the other thing that we're doing right now. We're working with a range of different organizations. We do monthly, perhaps bi-monthly town halls, so that we get in more than what the government can do. And I think when all of us put our efforts behind this, I think in a short period of time, we would have raised the level of understanding and seriousness, quite frankly, of this whole constitutional reform process.
Yeah. And it makes sense. I don't understand why you would have something as important as this, where you have so many avenues to communicate with people. It's not like 1776. You have phones, you have Zoom, you have a ton. You have how many radio stations you have at your fingertip, and we hardly hear anything about any movements.
But I
So
think that
you mentioned one second, Barker. Let me get this in, because to take it upon yourself with the Advocates Network to create this document that Barker went along with you to talk about the content of it and where it's going. The proposal, what do you hope? Because I know it's a proposal, but I want to hear from you. What do you hope the Advocates Network want to achieve by submitting this proposal with the different sections that they could consider to be a part of this constitutional reform? What do you hope the Advocates Network want to achieve from this proposal being submitted to the Reform Committee?
We framed it this way: if you want to achieve comprehensive constitutional reform, to achieve a new constitution. And in fact, we articulated the goal of the committee, right? And they made it very clear, they stated in the terms of reference, that the goal is to create this new constitution and to ensure that we move from the parliamentary monarchical arrangement that we currently have, and to replace that with constitutional, a republic, right? That's basically one of the things. And they want to affirm Jamaica's self-determination and cultural heritage. So those are the goals. Now, what will it take to get to this new constitution and to do it in a comprehensive way that the CRC wants to achieve? We have argued that we have to, if you like, prioritize some of the key issues. And that's one of the reasons, you may have heard that there are changes made to the Constitution right now, just yesterday in Parliament. And the question is, why did the constitutional change to extend the retirement age?
Yes.
Why would that be priority in the context of all of this conversation that is taking place? We were very surprised. And so what we've said is, listen, from our perspective, if we want to get this comprehensive change that can, push us along this path to a new republic, we need to make sure that we make it absolutely clear that we are creating a state in which the people are sovereign. So we need to enshrine sovereignty of the people in the new constitution, whether in a preamble or in the early clauses. We need to restructure Parliament. And we talked about how we restructure the Senate and the House of Representatives, as well as the role of the presidency. And we also want to strengthen citizens' rights to petition so that people have a voice. And of course, improving the judiciary. And we also talked about participatory budgeting. So we highlighted these 5 broad areas that we think are absolutely necessary. Now, what we hope to achieve is that whatever changes are made, these issues become part of it, because we have represented many people, organizations, individuals in the network who feel, yes, this is the direction we should go.
You know what, I think, before I hand over to Bar, I really think that they need, in this day and age, they need to focus on some checks and balances systems in there, because one section of the government will take over from the other one, and it's a lot of corruption, even worse than what is happening right now. It might turn it on its head. Barker, go quickly, because we don't want to keep Professor
But
Hamilton.
I actually want to keep Professor Hamilton because
No,
I
you
love
know what I mean. Of course, we want to keep her here.
because so I do have a few questions. I have one worry. Tell me if I should worry about this. That at the time when we get to a referendum, right? And I'm jumping way ahead now, assuming that we get to a point and a referendum is finally had, because I suspect constitutionally a referendum is the final question that is put. And then after that, the work gets done according to whatever terms of reference and all that stuff. I am worried that Jamaica gets to a point, whether PNP or GLP government, whichever case it is, anyone who is in government at the time, and the people vote no. Not necessarily no, vote no because of a lack of education and understanding of what the process is. And we end up with a referendum that keeps the current parliamentary democracy, the Westminster model, simply because people think they were voting against something. I think, tell me if the way the debate is currently framed, I believe that that's where we're headed. People just going no, because so the question isn't a form of a republic, if you get what I mean. It's almost a question of, do we want to have a constitutional change or not? And people may, based on how the debate is going, just vote against it. And that's my worry. Tell me if I'm...
A legitimate concern. I think people may vote against a process that they feel, for example, is not inclusive, or a process that they perceive to not be yielding the outcomes that they want. So that's always a risk in these referendum. You know, you may get an outcome that, you know, most of us don't agree with. I mean, recently with the British, there was a big controversy about their referendum. But that's the point. The referendum is about the will of the people. So it is so important that we don't leave anything to chance, and that we all get involved in this education process, so that, you know, we all won't come out of it becoming a constitutional scholars, but we certainly have enough appreciation and understanding of the importance of the issues and the kinds of things we ought to be pushing for. Because we have made it very clear from day one that it is just not enough to move the king. We're way past that now, because we've seen other countries that have moved the king, established a republic, but nothing has significant has changed.
nothing else. And to be fair, it's so I'm going to roll it a little bit further ahead now. So now my question then is about the nature of the question that we ask. Because as you mentioned, the British example, a very poor question was asked, and the answer that was given was a mood response, a dismissive response that really didn't reflect the magnitude of the change that was coming, and certainly did not prepare people for the repercussions of those decisions. And so Brexit is a kind of a response to the government per se, as against a response for the future. And as I listen to the conversation, it is increasingly becoming politicized in some ways, almost as seen as, and that's the worry. So I suppose when I say roll it back a bit, I'm wondering if at the time we get to the question, we're more asking the question about whether we have a parliamentary democracy or parliamentary republic, to use your phrase, or a presidential republic or executive republic. I think that's what the terms that you were using, right? I don't have it in front of me, that's why. But I remember reading that. But your point was that we do not want to end up back with a monarchy. We want to establish a system where there was more people power. my question is, when we get to that question, how do we ensure that that's the nature of the question that's on the paper and not one that says republic or not? You see what I mean?
Yes, it's a very good question, because in our submission, we argued that there needs to be clarity about this concept of a parliamentary democracy, or a parliamentary republic. That's the term that was used, because it was stated explicitly in the goal of the CRC to establish a Republic of Jamaica as a parliamentary republic. Now, what exactly is this parliamentary republic?
That's all your question. Yes.
Right. And so it is important, because if that's not clear, then, and you take that concept to a referendum, then people won't be very clear what it is. What does that mean? And people will conjure up all kinds of views about what it is or ought to be. In the same way, I hear a lot of people conjuring up different concepts about what a presidential republic should look like.
Yeah.
And the confusion is several. So on the one hand, there is a discussion about the form of the republic. Are we elected or are we appointed? Right? So that's a selection, right? And then the other side, the other discussion is the form. Is it executive or ceremonial? Right? And so you have these terms, and they're used sometimes interchangeably, and they mean different things to different people. So we've said, and we can talk a little about the forms in the conversation we've had within the Advocates Network. Some people supporting reforming the current parliamentary arrangement and making sure that we can tackle the flaws of a system we already know, versus changing to a new system. And there's some in the network who feel that we should move to this presidential system. We've agreed, however, as a group, that whichever system we adopt and we move to, we must have accountability measures in place. That's paramount.
Yes, yeah.
So we have to put these accountability measures in place to ensure that we don't strengthen the executive, right? And because we see that, and create unintentionally dictator, right, in the president. So we need that. And importantly, we also need explicit mechanisms to hear the people's voice. We've not done enough to put explicit arrangements in place to hear the people's voice. For example, the right to petition.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of law. If you want to speak to your parliament on an issue, you complete a form. If you fulfill the requirements, you have a right to speak. Those kinds of issues. Now, these are the things that we're talking about, because we feel that whichever system you put in place, that's the key. And I argue it doesn't really matter what label you give it. As long as you have a strong arrangement in which the executive is held to do its work and to do it well, but the people's representative is the framework, the legislature, where people's representative make law, controls, holds accountable the executive, and there's no executive abuses that we've kind of seen now with the corruption and other kinds of things that we're beginning to see, because there is not adequate oversight and accountability.
Yeah, totally agree with that. That's what I was alluding to earlier on, that it needs checks and balances right across to make sure that that there's no abuse. That's very good. Professor Hamilton, this day, which we broadcast this show, would be the 1st of August, which would be Emancipation. And then, we nickname it Emancipendence season. What are some of the things that you are considering in the network during this season of Emancipendence?
There are a number of things. We're wanting to engage conversation about, how to bridge that gap between the legislative changes that are required, I mean, including, of course, the changes in the Constitution, and how does those issues translate to the real bread and butter issues that Jamaicans are concerned about. So that's something that, my own Institute of Law and Economics is concerned about. And we are planning forums that could help to deepen an understanding of those issues so that people can see the relevance to their lives and why these constitutional provisions can impact directly the bottom line and improve the economic well-being of Jamaicans. So those are some of the issues that we're thinking through. But ongoing engagement is really where we are, especially among young people. And we will be organizing, as I said earlier, some town hall meetings ourselves to engage people in the process in a very simple way.
Yeah. Is the debate an annual thing? Will it be an annual thing?
Well, we're hoping so. Funding allowed, these things usually, there's always a funding constraint, but with adequate funding, we certainly will and can do it on an annual basis.
Okay. All right. Thank you so
I
much. Parker, you're good?
hold on. Yeah, I have one small point, and then
One
I don't even
small. Okay. All right.
ask her a question. I'm just gonna raise that one point.
Yeah.
I've been listening to what you are sharing here, Professor Hamilton, and listen, I'm in the diaspora, so I have my voice is limited in that regard, and certainly will carry very little weight in the conversation. I mean, I've looked across the world and I've seen varying forms of this kind of republic. And in that sense, one of the questions I would have is, what's the research that determines the ultimate form that we choose? But in terms of the referendum, and I do wonder about it because I've been on the whiplash end of a referendum that was poorly constructed and ended up with a result that does not make the country any better off, right? It makes some people happy, certainly, but it doesn't make the country better off.
Referring to England.
Referring to England, I am now looking at the Jamaican situation and wonder about the idea of almost a series of referenda, if we want to be accurate here, in the sense of one thing triggers the next. Because I believe, first of all, to settle one of the debates in your, even as I said, in your circle, which is, do we improve what we have or go for something different? We first need to settle that question in the country. That needs to settle first. Because if that's not settled, it will come back every time as a question about, have we chosen the right direction? And then it's almost like a trigger referendum. If that first question is accepted, then the work of deciding the next question, which is what format do we take? And people again get a chance to choose in that format. Because I think if we try to load any of those two into one question, we're going to get the wrong answer. We're going to get the wrong answer because it's too complex a question to ask a yes or no response to. And I'm sharing that as a thought process because that's how my brain tends to process things. I'm no constitutional scholar. I don't know if what I've just said would work in terms of how the Constitution is designed to work. But in my brain, in settling two key departures, there are four things happening here. We need to place them in a certain order and settle a question after a question, because I just know what's going to happen if one of those questions is asked and the other one isn't asked. I just know what's going to happen, and we're going to end up back with the status quo. My second point, just to follow up on the checks and balances, I actually do believe that the issues we have with checks and balances are already within the current format. I think what we do have is the will of the people that are within those structures to do their jobs and to have integrity. And I worry that even in any system, those people are going to have the same attitude, same stance. So Again, we certainly need to move to a more of a parliamentary oversight, some form of system that does that. The Supreme Court in America was supposed to do that. We have seen that those can be manipulated over time. Where people get 200 years of experience of manipulating it, they figure out a way to do it, right?
Yes.
So I want to share, I'm sharing only a comment here, yeah? And also just to say thank you for the work you're doing, because I can tell that it is frustrating work. I can tell that it is the kind of work that you're in a crowd talking and the music is loud and no one kind of hearing it, but the person beside you sometimes turn around and say, yeah, me hear what you say, can't it? Right?
That's
And it's
true.
that kind of work. It's frustrating, but sometimes the music is shut down and you get to say what you say. And it's so like you're shouting and then you just drop the voice down and make your point. So keep doing what you're doing. I think the number one way to get the advocates network work to be noted is to put it in writing, like this kind of document, because what that does, it cements the position of your work at the time that it's released, so that people can't say nothing is there, or people when you're talking or misunderstand. And the best you can do now is put it up to scrutiny and keep refining it. And as you expect the government to be handling it, you do the same. As you go out and do your consultation, you're refining that document as an organic document, so that the people that you can model what you're saying, and at some point you will have to be listened to. So thank you for your work.
Thank you. And let me correct you. Your voice is not insignificant in the diaspora. You have a megaphone in the diaspora. Remember, the size of the diaspora is about 10 times the size of Jamaicans here at home, especially when you pull in the second and third generation.
Third generation, you have a point. You have a point.
Yeah. So, but seriously, I think it's important that Jamaicans in the diaspora see themselves as playing a vital role. We know the role of the diaspora in our economy. We all know that very well. What we need to be a little clearer is that your voice is important in our democracy. And so the perspectives you bring, the support you give to the ideas that will deepen our democracy here in very practical ways, that is important. So I just wanted to say thank you for participating in this kind of forum and for the work you do, and never for 1 minute think it's unimportant or insignificant.
All right, thank you, Professor Hamilton, for coming on. Thank you, viewers, for being with us and tune in. I hope you learned something. I really hope you learned something, and get involved. Get involved with the Advocates Network. What's the YouTube channel for the Advocates Network? Is it
if you use, just type YouTube Advocates Network, constitutional reform submission, you'll find it.
Okay. All right, that's good.
And of course, yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry?
Professor Hamilton, thank you for sparing a little bit of time and spending it with us. And we're gonna touch base soon again, so that we track what's happening out there.
Absolutely, we certainly will. And of course, your listeners can email us at advocatesnet@gmail.
Go on,
Right?
repeat.
Advocatesnet, N-E-T, @gmail.com.
Okay. Yeah, we'll put that.
Maybe I should send you something.
Yeah. All right. Walk good, everybody, and happy Emancipation to everybody. Walk good. Take care.